Hello, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here today. So, we've been tasked with highlighting new ways that cities might start to solve some problems, and specifically to think about ways that mayors can drive real change by sitting at the table as opposed to behind a podium. So one of the ideas we're going to talk about more specifically today is this notion that Bruce has been working on called horizontal leadership, that Mayor James has been doing this whole time without even knowing it. Horizontal leadership, it turns out, is collaborative cross-sectional leadership. It's a different kind of approach to problem solving, particularly at the municipal level. And we might recast, according to this model, the mayor as the city's chief convener, I think would be a fair description. So just to set the table a little bit, Bruce, if you wouldn't mind, can you talk a little bit about the factors at play that are going to require cities to take less of a top-down approach? I mean, and maybe a different way to think about this is, why is collaboration essential, not just additive, for 21st century cities?
No, absolutely. So as some of the folks in the audience know, earlier this year, Brookings Press released a book called The New Localism, How Cities Can Thrive in the Age of Populism, that I co-authored with the late, great Jeremy Nowak. And what Jeremy and I were trying to posit was that cities are not governments. Unlike the federal government, which is a government, and states, which is a government, which means they, can be hijacked by partisanship and ideological polarization, and they often are, cities are networks. Public, private, civic, university, community, labor, environmental. And when you think about 21st century problem solving compared to the 20th century was top-down, driven by the national government when it was functional, and it was very compartmentalized. It was very, we really believed that experts or specialists would solve a problem. So if you had a housing problem, you go to HUD. If you had a transportation problem, go to DOT, EPA, yada, yada, yada. In the 21st century, problem solving is more bottom up, driven by these networks, and multidisciplinary. If you have a congestion problem, obviously the solution is not to widen the road. It's to basically think about housing location or economic location or tech, et cetera. So I think what's beginning to happen, everyone thinks, well, cities are stepping up because the federal government, like Elvis, has left the building and is not coming back.
And I want to talk a little bit more about that also.
But I think what we're seeing is a structural change in how we solve problems. A networked economy, a networked society requires this cross-sectoral, multidisciplinary action. And mayors really become, because of not their hard power, but because of their community legitimacy, they are able to exercise the soft power to bring everyone together to quote-unquote get shit done.
That's actually an excellent transition. So I want to ask the folks in the audience two questions to exactly that point, Bruce. The first question is this: are cities the future? Raise your hand if you think yes, cities are the future. Anyone a brave no, cities are not the future? That's the leading question. Yes, we have maybe one or two people. And then this is the real question, though. In the next 22 years, we'll go through 6 presidential election cycles, where we'll elect 3 or 4 new presidents in the next 22 years. My question for you guys is this: will one of those new 3 or 4 presidents be a sitting big city mayor, or someone who we just culturally understand to be a big city mayor, like a Bloomberg-esque figure? So yes, in the next 3 or 4 new presidents, we will have a big city mayor. No, in the next 3 or 4 elections, we will not have a big, it's pretty split. Which I think is maybe more of a comment on how people feel about America writ large than cities right now. Yeah. Mayor James.
Yes.
I promised I would only ask you one question about Google.
Okay.
This is it.
Sure.
So Kansas City, perhaps unexpectedly, became the most wired city in America. And that
you mean with fiber?
With fiber.
Yeah, because we were wired a long time ago.
Yeah. Fiber optically.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Kansas City was the first Google fiber city.
Right.
And my question for you is this: do you think that all of the players that were involved in making that project work, political, civic, business, do you think that those folks would have thought as aspirationally about something else Google not come in? And maybe a different way to think about this is, does it take an HQ2 level shock to the system for cities to execute on massive transformation?
I don't know that I can answer it quite that linearly. I will say this. The bigger the object, the more people are going to chase it. And when you have that many people chasing it, then you have more opportunities to build various coalitions in order to get the job done. You know, I don't think that you would have the same response if it was whether or not to move a Shake Shack to Kansas City, although there was a hell of a line, just a hell of a line. But I think that one of the things that we learned from Google and the pursuit of Google was how many people did in fact come together from different sectors for different reasons to accomplish the same goal. We had a very interesting and somewhat similar experience, but much more compact, much more driven, much more intense with regards to HQ2, which I firmly believe was Amazon's way of collecting data on a bunch of cities that they had absolutely no intentions of ever doing anything with, but now they know they know everything that there is to know, and we gave them some tremendous stuff. We gave them 3D visualizations of our infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have land values and all sorts of different things, demographic information. The pursuit of Google was a cross-sector, variant, deviant, inclusive, diverse pursuit that everybody hung together to the end. And then the even more remarkable thing is once we actually were able to get it, then it grew into a way of, now that we've got it, what do we do with it movement.
If we are to think a little bit cynically, and I share your interpretation of the play that Amazon was running with the HQ2 search, is there something, though, positive that cities can draw, that maybe Philadelphia specifically can draw, having invested so much time in a really dynamically cross-sector way? Can we take that as a win, or is that sort of just us patting ourselves on the back? And
well, you know, I think pre-Amazon, you know, collaboration in Philly was an unnatural act between non-consenting adults. I mean, this was, you know, this calls itself the city of brother-ly love. It's not quite like that on a daily basis.
I ain't seen no love.
So I have to say, what has been surprising about the Philly bid is how it was able to bring together at the grass tops, you know, institutions and sectors that really had not played well together. You know, hashtag Philly delivers, you know, you go to that website. You know, A, it's about collaborating to compete, and B, it's a positive, asset-driven story of this great city. And a lot of times when, you know, folks, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, which is another difficult place, but you know, when I would come to Philly for years, everyone just sort of complained, you know? I mean, it's just like, I mean, this place has so many assets and advantages compared to so many other parts of not just the United States, the world, right? But there was a sense of, you know, we're not quite aware of it, cognizant, or believing that we could leverage it. I think the cities that are going to succeed going forward in the next, and I'm not talking years, 3 months, 6 months, are those that can take that collaborative experience and move it quickly, convert it quickly to something productive. And, you know, we do have, and we'll probably talk about, this federal tax incentive. Federal government by complete accident actually enacted something semi-intelligent. So, you know, we have the ability for cities to unlock local capital and attract national capital, private capital, for some important investments in opportunity zones. And I think the cities that are able to convert their bid quickly over to what Jeremy and I would have called an investment prospectus, I think are going to be quite successful.
You know, one of the things about projects like pursuing HQ2, Google, what we did with the Republican National Convention, which I was so happy not to get. Some of the things that I think we really went into it with a little bit different approach. Was it would be great if we get this, but even if we don't, here's what we're going to do. We are going to raise our profile. We're going to use this and leverage it and get a whole lot of free media, but we are also going to build an infrastructure of collaboration. Everybody that we work with on these projects, we now have an insight to, a connection with, and we can pull together for another project. And we did that. We pulled people who had worked on Google into the HQ2. We pulled those same people into the Republican thing. And you have to have that infrastructure, or you're going to build it when the next attempt comes along. We don't have to build it anymore on certain things. Now, there are certain different other types of things you need a different sort of infrastructure, but we've got it there. But I think it's always important to remember for a city, particularly a city like Kansas City, that doesn't have the East Coast name of a Philadelphia or the West Coast name of an LA or San Francisco, that we have to always maximize every opportunity that we get. Cities are the home of innovation in this country right now. They're a home of innovation in terms of tech and in terms of business, but they're also the home of innovation in terms of governance. We have to learn how to govern. And the first thing that I've learned, as a sitting mayor was that we have to be able to pull people together from different areas in order to get big things or anything done. And it's been a remarkable transformation. It builds a lot of civic spirit, and it builds an opportunity to build not just the thing that you're chasing, but the next thing and things that you hadn't even thought of.
Absolutely.
I want to dig into that because that's fascinating, and I think that's at the core of everything that we're talking about here and at the core of this new localist approach that you and Jeremy were working on. So in Philly, it feels like the case, and in anecdotal conversations I've had with folks, that those major institutions, Penn, Jeff, Comcast or IBX, that they all feel basically as inaccessible as the mayor's office feels. And so when we talk about building these kinds of collaborations, what we're really talking about technically or philosophically is basically bringing the leadership of the core institutions of a city together to sit down to address major problems, hash it out internally somewhat, and then drive the change from that group. In conversations that I've had with folks, I've heard that people are very skittish, I think, around the idea of these institutions which are not democratically elected, that feel as far removed as the mayor's office, that they ought to sort of have this kind of influence. Some people have said it feels like backroomish to them. I would like to hear from both of you as to how you can build this kind of a structure, maybe starting with you, Mayor James, about how you built what you built without folks feeling excluded from the process.
Well, you don't exclude them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's step number one. You simply don't exclude them. I remember sitting at the unification breakfast the day after the election in 2011, and the chamber president came over to me and said that he wanted to talk to me, and I said, how long? He said, maybe an hour. What's it about? It's Google, and we need you to get involved in a business thing. And I said, I'm not even in office, dude, you know. This was going to be my nap time. So I go, and after talking about needing to get involved in the contract negotiations with Google, the last thing was, we need you to come to a meeting of the business leaders of Kansas City to try to talk this other business from moving out of town. And I said, okay, cool. So I go to this meeting a few days later, and I walk into the room, and it is middle-aged and younger, slightly younger than middle-aged white guys. The only women I saw were bringing things in and out. I added a little bit of a raisin in the milk quality. Well, somebody had to. You know, Baba White Sheep. Then there was another brother there who happened to be the head of the Economic Development Corporation by way of simply graduating up the steps. And the person that we were trying to keep in town was a Latino that I knew. So he walks into this room and he looks at it and he kind of walks over to me and sits down by me and he says, awfully bright in here. If you try to do anything without recognizing the various I hate the word stakeholders, but the other interested parties that have a real interest and a need to be there, then you wind up creating more work for yourself. First, you got to sell it to one group, then you got to go and sell it to another group. And when you try and sell it to the other group, that group's not going to like something, so you got to go back and forth. It's so much easier just to bring everybody in at the same time. And that means diversifying it in terms of sex, diversifying it in terms of race and socioeconomics and geography, and including communities that have been traditionally excluded, and have that conversation up front so that then when you finally move it out of the room and onto the street, you've got every possible organization that you can, or every possible group of people represented and engaged, and now we own it. Everybody owns it. Otherwise, you do it with the heads of the corporations and the mayor, and then you go out and you own it, but they don't like it. Now you got a problem. So avoid all the nonsense, bring people into the conversation at the beginning, and you don't have a problem.
Other than Kansas City, who else has mastered this?
Well,
what does success look
so
like?
our book talks about Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh is a 21st century playground of innovation. Now, the reason that is true is the philanthropic sector fundamentally collaborates. You call Heinz and they say, well, let's get Mellon in, let's get Hillman in. Carnegie Mellon, Pitt, the Allegheny Conference, the political leadership. I mean, and you know, these folks have come together. Now, folks will say, oh my Lord, this isn't democratically legitimate. We're having like an incredible experiment in this country. The feds are checked out, the states are hostile, and mostly loony, to tell you the truth, right? And so what are we basically saying? That these major anchor institutions should just hold back, not engage, be globally significant institutions, but don't take care of your backyard? I think it's incredible what's going on. Drexel, Penn, Temple, Jeff, they're civically engaged institutions, along with the corporate and what is a much smaller philanthropic sector here, by the way. I think this is the 21st century way of doing things. In a way, it's modernizing the Tocqueville in America. We've always been different from other countries. We've always had public-private civic university community engaged. Yes, it is messy. Yes, it is chaotic. And in most parts of the country, it doesn't particularly work. But it can work here. It definitely works in Pittsburgh. Our poster child in the book was Indianapolis, you know, where leaders of all the big medical institutions and the philanthropies basically said, we're going to be an ecosystem rather than an ecosystem. And because of that, you know, they're the second biggest exporter of life science products in the United States after California.
And is this a move, in your estimation, towards this fairly insular kind of way of thinking, like we are here, we need to take care of our problems locally despite our global presence? Are cities now and moving forward in America kind of going to be on their own? Are they going to have to develop a level of self-sufficiency because they're not going to be getting the sort of support from the federal and state government?
Hey, Bruce, before you answer, did you say life-size products?
Life science.
Life science.
I'm sure there's a city.
Do you have to blow them up or what?
Product, but I'm not going to say.
Do they have names?
So I think what's happened de facto, it's not like anyone had an intelligent plan for this country, but de facto, what has basically happened is the federal government has become a healthcare company with an army, right? And because of that, the R&D that they provide into our cities is around healthcare and around military research, right? That's basically what they do. The states, I have to tell you, sometimes I don't know what the hell the states do, but that's, you know, artifact of history. And then cities and metros are funding the future. If you want to fund the future and create, you know, give everyone the opportunity to be middle class by middle age, you've got to invest in infrastructure, you've got to invest in innovation, and you have to invest in inclusion. Cradle to career. You have to invest in this stuff. Housing, et cetera, et cetera.
And cities are going to have to own that internally.
Cities are going to have to basically figure out the new ways of financing infrastructure, innovation, and inclusion. Occasionally the feds will spark back to life, you know, states maybe less so, but this is reality. This is the way it is. And, you know, we can say, let's wait around to the next intelligent, functional federal government comes around. You know, a 2-year-old today will be 20 by then. Yeah. I don't think we have the time. No. We've got to basically get this done locally.
Well, we learned a long time ago that you cannot wait for somebody to come save you. Yeah. There's one very different thing about cities versus states and the federal government. Cities must perform and deliver services every single day. Every single day. We just had a snow. And before the third flake hit the ground, there were people wondering where the plows were, okay? You know, some bozo was like, Prairie Village has all of their streets cleaned already. And I said, you know, Prairie Village has 4 miles of road and 5 plows. We got 6,300 lane miles of road. We plow from Kansas City to Boston, or from San Diego to Boston twice every time it snows. So don't compare us to Prairie Village. But the bottom line is that we have to deliver. And here's another thing that I think separates us from state and federal governments. We have to be accountable and accessible. I can't go to the grocery store without somebody wanting to talk to me. I can't go anywhere without somebody wanting to talk to me. And that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing, because I'm in touch with the people of my city, and through our citizen satisfaction survey and other things, we have a very good sense of what's important to them, and we tailor what we're doing in order to meet their needs. The bottom line is simply this. I agree with Bruce wholeheartedly. We cannot count on the states. They own one of our bridges. It needs to be taken down and rebuilt. It's a $220 million deal. They don't have the money, so we are coming up with half the money to build the bridge that they own, because it's important to us. We have to do those things, because if we don't, we have 44,000 cars a day that are going to have to find alternate routes right into the heart of downtown. The other thing about cities that I think is absolutely important is, if we are serious in this country about tackling chronic problems and finding sustainable solutions, the only place where that's going to happen is on the city and county level, because we are pragmatic. And if you look at state and federal governments, it's totally ideology. It's all about R's and D's and kicking the crap out of your opponent and saying whatever the hell it takes to win, but nobody's solving problems. We live with the problems on the city level, and we have to do something about it. If our people aren't getting health care, that's still going to be something we're going to pay for, so let's find a way to take care of our people and get them some health care with our safety net. We have 2 health levies, taxes, that we use as safety net provisions for people, because they can't get insured or covered any other way. But cities have to do those things, and the neat thing about it is that this is also different from the state and the federal governments. Mayors share. I can call up any mayor in this country that I know and say, how did you do so-and-so? And they'll send me the entire book. And the rule is, I give them credit the first time, and after that, it's my idea.
So can we talk a little bit about getting shit done versus just talking?
Absolutely.
In Philly, the experience as a resident interacting with city government, specifically some city departments, it can be excruciating. And it's really hard to turn the Titanic in a lot of these departments. It's like deep state, right? Like the stuff there is just not going to change. How do you incentivize departments or get them on board with a notion of performance management that isn't always going to feel really good, and it's also going to day-to-day maybe look a little bit different than operating the way that they're used to? But to the way that you've described it is kind of the only way you're going to know if you're tackling the right problems and if your solutions are actually working.
Well, our city manager has a very good performance management system, and it was in place before we got there. I wanted to take it to a different level when we started KC Stat, which is the outward projection of the performance management combined with our citizen satisfaction survey. So we take the citizen satisfaction survey and we find out what citizens are wanting, and then we tailor our performance in order to try to meet those expectations. And the first year that we had KC Stat, in June we'd meet with Public Works, and in July we'd meet with Public Safety, and then in August we'd meet with the airport folks. And we found that we weren't getting anywhere. So what we did was we looked at the problems, the issues, and said, what pieces are needed to solve this problem? So we need public works, we need trash collection, we need animal safety, we need public safety over here, and neighborhoods and housing, so we brought them together. Wow, the silos started breaking down because now we were working across divisions. And then the next thing that you have to do is, I don't care who you are, if you're any kind of a leader and you're not showcasing, shining spotlights on every single person that does something good, you're missing an opportunity. You can avoid a lot of raises if you do a lot of praises. Okay? And when you're a city government, raises are harder to come by than praises. But recognize what people do, hold them out. We celebrate improvements in our citizen satisfaction surveys. We bring people from the community in to talk about their experiences. We talk about the people in the departments who've done extraordinary things. Every quarter we have an awards deal. We do things to show people that we care. And because of that, we've also made it safe for them to fail. Because we want people to think innovatively. We want them to try this. Does it work? It didn't work. Am I going to get fired? Oh, hell no. You might even get a raise because you got us a step closer. But we need to support people and let them know it's okay to fail. We don't use our KC stat or our performance management as a tool to bludgeon you or threaten you. We use it as a tool to get better. Everybody's bought into that. And because of that, we had an $800 million GO bond issue that required 3 separate property tax raises on the same ballot, all of which had to pass by at least 56.1%, all of which passed by at least 62%. And the reason that we were able to do it was we took the top 4 things from the citizen satisfaction survey, said this is what you want, this is what it's going to cost, either vote for it or shut up. Don't call me if you don't. If you want it and you don't want to pay for it, then stop calling. I mean, you can't have it both ways.
So this actually lends itself nicely to what I think is recognized as a pipe dream, but I think is maybe the future of Philadelphia. And I'd like to bounce this idea off you. Philadelphia and the surrounding suburban collar counties secede from Pennsylvania. They merge with Delaware, and they create basically like an aggregated metro state. I think it's probably going to be a lot easier to do this sort of work in that kind of a context. Am I wrong?
Well, you know, I went to Barcelona back in October when Catalonia was trying to secede from Spain and join the European Union. The only problem was Spain wouldn't let Barcelona out and the European Union wouldn't let them in. Other than that, there was like way too much sangria flowing, So we do have this minor 18th century problem that of the Constitution that we have to deal with.
I think I think the secession, as I've looked into it, the secession might be okay, and I think Harrisburg would let us go. We'd be calling their bluff for sure.
Yeah, there's a couple of members.
The merger is the challenge.
Might be hard.
Yeah.
No, there's a couple of members of the state legislature. Go with good riddance. Of course, it would blow a hole in Pennsylvania's budget that they would never recover.
But just in the most futuristic, sort of like big picture, maybe aspirational sense, are cities going to have to be completely reconstituted in the future to function as different kinds of sort of sovereign entities, or metro areas, if not cities?
So I think what cities have to do is, I think we have to get to the virtual state, right? Because, the real merger will be complicated. But cities have 3 kinds of power. They have government power, which is what everyone tends to focus on. But then they have market and civic power. And I think we have spent basically the 20th century focusing on the government power bit, right? What we now need to do in the 21st century is leveraging the market and civic power so we can actually create this dream of shared prosperity, right? And when I think about Philadelphia, obviously Kansas City is like at another level of government capacity, frankly, and particularly under Mayor James's leadership. What you have here is you have the 2 best business improvement districts in the country, Center City District, right, and University City District. You have the best community development finance institution in the country that Jeremy built, the Reinvestment Fund. You have the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, which celebrated its 60-year anniversary this year, that redeveloped the Navy Yard when the military gave it back. You have some of the best public-private, private-public, private-civic institutions in the country. And I think they provide the infrastructure to help you leverage this market and civic power so you could ultimately crack at the poverty issue, crack at the jobs issue, and crack at some of the broader issues of sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. You've got an incredible network here of practitioners. They're just not all, some of them are in government, but some of them are spread throughout. And so organizing that, I think, is the central challenge, right? Capital's actually not the problem. There's lots of capital in the US, right? Organizing it, and putting it towards, clear, specific, concrete goals is really the issue.
Larry, how are we on time? Are we?
We can start taking some questions.
Yeah.
Questions? How about now?
Yeah.
Hello, thank you very much. This is a very interesting conversation. I am wondering, there is a movement afoot. It's starting in California with a lady named Ellen Brown, who's been talking about creating public banks in municipalities and states. The original public bank in the United States is the Bank of North Dakota, which has been in existence for 100 years. It's been successful since the 60s. It was struggling for a while. But now it's a mainstay of the state's economy. Philadelphia could have its own bank if we wanted it.
Public what?
Banks.
Public bank.
Public banks.
Yeah, first of all, I'm glad you brought that up. We talk about the North Dakota Bank in the book. I think there's a whole group of public institutions or publicly owned, privately managed institutions that the U.S. has to create. I would say even more important than a public bank is a public asset corporation like the one they have in Copenhagen or the one they have in Hamburg, where they're able to take all the land that is owned by the government, the city, the county, the state, the port authority, the airport authority, the redevelopment authority, the stadium authority, yada, 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 and really put it into one kind of corporate vehicle and then get the revenue from the disposition of that publicly owned land or buildings to do what you want. Invest in infrastructure, invest in innovation, invest in inclusion, right? So I think there are other institutional models either that have been practiced in the US or in Northern Europe, to a lesser extent in Asia, that now need to be brought into the United States. Because we're basically building off a legacy of 20th century institutions. We could leverage our market and civic power if we have different institutional models.
Mayor James, I'm sort of curious how you get buy-in from citizens who think they know what they want. I'm thinking of the airport in particular. I grew up in Kansas City, so familiar with, we want a new airport, but we want our airport. So when you get conflicting wants and desires and what you can work with, how you then bring those citizens to the table to actually have that discussion to move forward to get them what they're looking for.
Very slowly and very painstakingly. With the airport specifically, it was a long, long slog. We had so many preconceived, erroneous, flat-out wrong ideas about things like airport financing, and this is going to be a tax, and I only fly once a year, why should I pay for a $1 billion airport? Because they simply didn't know. So one of the things that we did, and we had a great deal of success with it, was the chamber took on the task of putting together a serious dog and pony education show. And they would go to various companies and workplaces every week for weeks and just do an hour-long presentation over lunch, and people flocked to it, and we started seeing the tide turn. The other thing that we did was we ran a full-fledged political campaign, but not in the way that we normally had with a bunch of television and stuff. We did some of that, but not that much. What we did instead was we had a bunch of people on the street with iPads with recorded messages, videotaped messages, and surveys and things, and we sent them out in 3 separate times. The first time was, what do you think? The second time was, what about this? And the third time is, don't you really want this? And at the end of 5 years, after we had people say, nobody's going to vote for it, nobody's going to vote for it, a bunch of starts and stops, we had 76% vote for it. And it was all because they were educated on some key points. First, we need to find out what are the problems. Second, we need to create a strategy for how do we address these problems and who is best suited to address these problems. In some places, it might be one group, in another place, it might be another. So you need to have that collaborative effort so that you can send the right person to the right group to address the right problem. And it was a long slog, but it got done very well.
Hey, so last night I had the pleasure of listening to Michelle Obama over at the Wells Fargo Center, and the moderator asked her, would you ever consider running for president? And she said a hard no. But standing here, Mayor James, listening to you, I feel like you might make a good candidate.
Just when I thought we were gonna be friends. That's an interesting idea that I have never, that I've been asked before, and to be honest with you, not something I want to do. And I'll tell you why. I don't do well in places where argument is the order of the day. I do well in places where getting things done are, that's why, if you want to know the truth of the matter, I think being president, even though it has more prestige, you get the plane, you get all the other stuff. I've got the best job in politics as a mayor because we are with the people that we're supposed to be representing and leading. We are doing things every day. We get instant feedback, and we can actually see what we're doing come out of the ground, go into a child's head or into a school. So being president, just so that you can go up and argue with somebody who's got an R in front of their name or a D in front of their name and talk about esoterica, about stuff that doesn't matter to the average person, not my cup of tea, although I have a very great interest in seeing some mayors who have that kind of political ambition, but also have that pragmatic sense of governance, maybe be in that spot, but it ain't me. Not to mention the fact, I don't think this country is ready for another good-looking black president so fast.
I think we can take a couple more questions. Let's go right here.
Sorry. Bruce, you mentioned that the problem is not capital, that we have a lot of capital in this country. I'm curious how we can obtain that capital in two ways.
Call Bruce, 815.
I mean, not just by having to convince those on high to give it in the way of like HQ2, but actually get, because currently it's very concentrated, get it back and also keep it as a democratic process in deciding what we're actually going to do with that capital. Because the traditional means of getting it, I guess, which would be taxes, is kind of considered so distasteful at the moment. So what would you suggest?
So, I don't know how many of you have seen this movie called The Martian with Matt Damon, where he gets stuck up on Mars, and then they go back and they get him. And so the last scene, he's like teaching the next group of astronauts, and they basically said, well, how the hell do you get back? And he said, I did the math. I solved one problem, then I solved another problem. I think the way we finance what we need in our cities, workforce housing, clean energy, infrastructure, remember corridors of retail, reclaiming our industrial facilities, like the Bud Building. I mean, you can keep going on, right? Is we do the math. We actually begin to think through, again, the fundamentals, the basics, debt, subsidy, equity, right? This is really boring stuff. I mean, this is why Jeremy and I decided to start a Metro Finance Lab at Drexel University, right? We have to get back to the fundamentals of how the public, private, civic, university, and other sectors actually design, finance, and deliver the kind of projects we need, right? It's not all going to come from the public side. In fact, a good portion of what gets done in the United States is public-private or private-public or whatever. I think the capital's out there. I think what they're missing are the instruments or the proven intermediaries or institutions to manage their capital and get stuff done. And so that's what we're doing right now, is we're basically going through all these different kinds of products that we all know we need. And we're coming up with a new, quote-unquote, capital stack, right? Debt, subsidy, and equity to get it done. We're smart enough in this country to do it. Frankly, you're smart enough in Philadelphia. You got the best practitioners in the country. But we've got to stop thinking the feds are coming. They're not coming. No. And most of the way in which we finance some of this stuff is built off a mid-20th century model of federal money that would then somehow, get leveraged to get these projects done. I think we're in a different kind of world, and we actually have to adapt to it.
I agree with Bruce, and I also think that one other thing that we need to do is we need to employ systems thinking and systems processes more than what we do sometimes, and look for those catalytic things that will spur additional investment and halo opportunities around whatever it is you're trying to build or create.
Bruce, if I'm allowed to, I have a follow-up on what you said, which is, I've tried to get a list of those assets that the city owns, and it's not actually kept anywhere. Right. And is that what you're talking about? Ways that we can leverage from our own portfolio economic investment?
Yeah, if you want to finance stuff, I mean, this is the Copenhagen and the Hamburg model. If you want to actually finance large-scale infrastructure, you need to know what the government owns. Like, you would think there'd be a website, right? Not quite, right? When I come back, I want to run a parking authority, because that's actually where all the power is. But that's a whole separate conversation we could have at the bar. But you need to know what the government owns, you need to know the value of what it owns, and you need to have a disposition strategy so the public can benefit, as opposed to having a fire sale because everyone's desperate. So I think with big data, with big analytics, we can begin to create a platform, right, of data to build this kind of new finance in the United States. We act like we're poor, right? We're not. These are the wealthiest cities in the world. What we don't have are the mechanisms, which are tried and tested primarily from Northern Europe, to basically bring it to, the Northern Europeans, we basically have, every time you want to have a laugh at the national level, you say, look at Denmark, right? And everyone just, Denmark. Actually, Denmark has the most powerful institutions that know how to basically build prosperous economies that work for large segments of the population, right? So we have to get beyond, they're just about tax and regulate. No, they're actually about publicly owned, privately driven institutions that can regenerate an entire city. We have to bring this back into the United States.
We have a question here from one of our great volunteers today.
Thank you. I hope I'm not jacking anyone's question. So, talking about HQ2, one concept that I'm really interested in, which has been published in mainstream news sources, is the whole idea of the prosperity bomb that's coming with these HQ2 facilities. And with them, and I thought it was an interesting concept, because if you look at San Francisco and the real estate and everything that's going on, no need to look further about the damage that these companies can do to cities. And with HQ2 coming, the East Coast inevitably is going to get these tech companies moving forward and more entrenched in our cities. So how do local governments stop even starker socioeconomic divides that happen within our cities, and stop companies from creating, gentrification on steroids that happens within these cities?
Well, we kind of benefit from stuff coming to the East Coast, because I'm only not really kidding, because we get so many people who can't live here. They can't afford to live here. They can afford to live for what you guys pay in housing here. You can buy a house and a half in Kansas City and be closer to stuff and still get the same lifestyles in some respects. So we benefit from that, but that's driving our properties up as well. I wish I had a better answer for you, to be quite honest. I think it's always, people get very attracted to the big to the most glamorous date in the world, wanting to date you, or at least see you on whatever that TV show was about dating, and you got a chance. And everybody goes hoping that they're going to get the date, but at the end of the day, sometimes you're happy that you didn't. You know, I mean, it turns out to be a monster or something. And we're kind of glad that we didn't, because it would have basically become the dog and we would have become the tail. I don't know what to do about that, to be honest. I wish I had an easy answer for you, but it's very attractive to people who think there's some sort of prestige that comes with being able to attract something like that. What they don't see is the damage that it does to housing, the displacement that it does for people, and what it does across the city in terms of who now exercises civic power and authority. Not to mention the very interesting cost of what do you have to pay to get them there. You damn near need to mortgage your souls to get a company to a city.
And my only response to this is that our cities, our major metropolitan areas, have economies the size of countries. And what we now need to do is to organize a consortium of cities and to exercise their market power with major financial institutions and major technology companies. Because the technology companies and the financial institutions are treating every city individually. We now need concerted action. Right now, what we have are mayor organizations that look up to the federal government and lobby for legislation that never comes. What we need is a horizontal organization. So next time someone like Amazon comes around and says, here are our terms for how you deal with us. And I think that's the way in which cities ultimately exercise the true power that they have.
Are we wrapped?
All good, yeah.
Okay. All right, my job here is to get these guys talking and land the plane on time. I hope we did that. Please join me in thanking Bruce Katz.
Good job, Bruce.